All right, welcome. My name is Bob Wyatt,
And I'm Todd Larson.
and we're the authors of the Ultideic Prophecies. And today we wanted to bring you another episode of our conversations, some of them book related, some of them related to current events or other things in our industry. And for today's episode, we wanted to dive into our religions. We've had questions about the religions, how we came up with them, what's the overall philosophy for many of them, and we wanted to talk to you a little bit about how we reached this point and some specifics for each of the religions. So, for those seven of you out there that are interested in this kind of stuff, we sit back and enjoy the ride. This should be a fun experience. Without further ado, Todd, I'll turn the time over to you, and you can talk about some of the humble origins from when we were teenagers on how this got started, and then how it evolved into something a little bit better than maybe where we started.
Yeah. So a little bit of background. Again, we've talked about this on previous podcasts, but we started this whole project as an attempt to build a better fantasy role playing game. We played Dungeons and Dragons a lot in high school and loved the game, but thought that some rule changes might make the storytelling a little bit better. So we set about building a new world and a new game. And one of the features of Dungeons and Dragons is that characters have an alignment, and on two axes, you are either tend to be more chaotic, which means disobeying laws or ignoring laws and rules, versus lawful, and then on the other axis is good and evil, and you can be neutral on both of those axes. So it creates a 3 by 3 grid, which gives you 9 options for alignment. You can be lawful evil, you could be lawful neutral, or lawful good, etc. And
Right.
so we sort of took that 9 alignment structure and decided, rather than just having an alignment, let's make a god for each of those alignments. And that was our original sort of conception, is we had a
Yeah.
god that was lawful good and a god that was chaotic evil, and then we
Yeah. And that doesn't resemble what we have today,
nothing
but that
like
is what we started with.
that's where we started. So
And thankfully, we graduated to something better.
yeah, so that's the reason. I mean, we never moved away from having 9 gods. We've ever since then had 9, but that's the reason it was 9 originally. Uh, but then we realized the lawful, chaotic, and neutral. I mean, evil and good paradigm didn't really work for what we were interested in exploring in the book. And so at first we gave the deities actual characters, characteristics, and personalities, etc., and made them more like characters. In fact, we had scenes from the gods' perspectives originally, but
Yeah.
eventually we moved beyond that as well. And where the world has tended to evolve and where we currently stand is that the gods for us represent um, moral systems that we see major groups of people in the world living their lives by on Earth. So on Earth, people maybe follow utilitarianism as a moral system, or people may
Yeah.
believe in doing service and treating others with love and care, and that's their highest moral value. Or some people are in it for themselves and they just want to maximize their own benefit and don't really care about other people. And as we looked at the way the world works, and as people align themselves, regardless of what they claim on the surface is their moral alignment, whether that's with a religion, say Christian or Buddhist or whatever, Zoroastrianism, regardless of what
Mhm.
people claim, um, and even among people, say, if you take Muslims and, I don't know, Hindus, uh, even within that religion, some people are very selfishly oriented, etc., and other people may be very morally aligned. even though they come from very different religious systems, or even no religious system. Maybe they're atheists, but their own moral code suggests that they should love other people and treat them with dignity and respect. And someone who's Christian has essentially the same moral motives, regardless of where they derive those moral motives from. They live by the same set of moral principles. And so what we were really interested in was, how do we represent the moral systems that people live by and personify those as in the form of a god, and then through that god, the way that their religion shows up in the world. And so that's what the gods sort
Yeah.
of generally represent.
And I think in a lot of ways it was deconstructing religious teachings into similar teachings. You know, if you
moral
explain,
systems.
moral systems. If you explain the moral systems behind many religions, you'll find a lot of similarities. And we tried to take those similar categories and group them together and come up with moral codes that are irrespective of earthly religions, and displayed them as a philosophy, as dogma for, well, basically as the teachings of these fictitious religions, which we built on. And many of them grew and evolved as we did, as our understanding did, or as we recognized, hey, there's a philosophy that I don't think is really represented by what we've created. Let's try to see if we can have that philosophy represented also in our works.
Yeah.
And so they did evolve over time. I don't expect that we've done a perfect job of representing everything and everyone, but I think it's been fairly comprehensive, and that's why we're comfortable moving forward with it and putting it out to everybody today.
Yeah. Now there is a useful axis on which to imagine, or a grid on which to imagine where the gods fall, because we're very interested in sort of two primary moral questions. One is, and I'm going to imagine this as a horizontal axis, and that's authority. So either authority rests with respect to an individual. They recognize authority either external to themselves, being in a group or a political or whatever, a god, a religion, the whims of the majority, whatever it is. There's some external source of authority that they consider to be a higher authority than themselves, or they are themselves the highest authority in their own lives, and every other authority external to themselves is subordinate in the hierarchy of authority. And that question of where you fall on the spectrum between external authority versus internal or individual authority is one of the major axes on which we place moral systems.
Or at least that we'll discuss it today.
Yeah. And so, and then the other axis, and we'll call this the vertical axis, is your orientation in terms of who you try to benefit by your actions, or your, how you live in the world. So externally facing or externally directed benefit or service, what we might call altruism, versus internally focused, what people may call selfish or egoism.
Or egoism.
Yeah. Ayn Rand called it materialism, where your highest moral aim is to benefit yourself. Now, you may consider it beneficial to yourself to do good for other people, but the primary root moral value is your own benefit, not living for the benefit of others. Whereas, say, Christianity, for example, places living for the benefit of others as a very high moral value, one of its highest moral values, actually. And this was one of the reasons why, taking Ayn Rand as an example, she really had problems with the moral underpinnings of Christianity, because it was opposed to what she advocated for in
right.
in her system of objectivism. So anyway, we'll go with altruism
so we have
and
these
egoism.
we have these two axes. Yeah, you've got the altruism and egoism. Let's say that's the vertical axis, and then you've got the collectivism versus individualism. I know that's not a perfect term for either of those, but it's a good way to measure our religions and kind of talk about them in that framework.
Very, very useful framework. So, we while we have not 9 deities, we have 8 religions, because what we came to realize over time, originally this was not the case. We just had the 9 gods, but we came to realize that 2 of the gods in particular were very closely aligned in their moral philosophy, but they had different means or emphasis of expressing it and living it.
Right.
And that aligned really with more of a masculine expression versus a feminine expression. And so those ended up being gods that we merged into one single religion. We didn't want to merge them into a single god because we think they represent somewhat different areas of focus.
Yeah, we felt it was useful to keep them separate and talk about those areas of focus rather than picking one or the other or just creating a whole new one.
And what we've noticed,
so that's how we.
Yeah. So this is Yanvar is the god, and Karail is the goddess, and we ended up making them a married couple. They're the only deities that are married at all. So all of the other gods are single or are not married, and so but Yanvar and Karail are, and there's reasons why being married fits with their moral system, which is called the religion is Servarism. Their followers are Servari, and service, we came to realize, is pretty close to the perfect expression of their core moral value, which is to love and serve others. It's other focused. They do care about authority, but their relationship to the authority axis is complicated. It's not as clean as they
Yes.
fall either on the individualism versus collectivism end of
I think there are aspects of each in their teachings.
They touch across the spectrum, actually, and the interplay between aspects where they advocate individualism versus the aspects where they advocate collectivism become very interesting. But on the altruism versus egoism, there's no question they're pegged all the way at the altruism end of the spectrum. And the way that manifests, we think, between masculine expressions of altruism and somewhat as it plays into individualism versus collectivism, although not exclusively. And then the feminine side of that becomes how the 2 gods sort of interplay with each other. And it's interesting because, again, these are not proxies for a particular religion on Earth. Like, you could have atheists that would be Servari, or you could have Hindus or Christians or Muslim. It doesn't really matter. Any religious system or non-religious affiliation on Earth, people within those systems or no system would very comfortably fit within the Servari faith in our world. And one thing, again, we've talked about this before, but it's definitely worth noting up front, is that you cannot tell whether something is altruistic by the behavior, right? So you can't tell if someone's aligned with the Holy Couple merely because they are serving at a soup kitchen. I mean, chances are probably pretty good that if someone's serving at a soup kitchen, they are probably oriented towards serving others, but not necessarily.
Potentially. Yeah, I
Someone,
mean, when you see the selfies that are being taken, or if there was a news crew outside, you might question whether that's altruism or whether there's
yeah,
other motives
or,
behind
or,
it. We recognize that everybody has different
or there's a
motives
cute girl
behind
that
the
also
actions
works
they
there and
take.
you're trying to impress her. And so the only
Exactly.
reason you decided to volunteer at the soup kitchen is to try and win brownie points with this girl that you're
Which
trying to
is
win over.
not an invalid reason to volunteer.
Totally fine. It's not Servari in its orientation.
Right.
Right. Okay. So
Exactly.
so the point is you can't tell from behavior. So all of these really come down to you have to know what the underlying motive is to be able to tell. And there are people all the time on earth and in our books who think that they're oriented or aligned with one religion or another, but
Right.
in reality their true motives make them aligned with someone else. So for example,
Yeah.
someone may very well believe that they're let's say Servari, but they get drunk all the time and take drugs and I don't know, engage in illicit sex and the rest of the things, and you're like, you live a very hedonistic life. Your motives for everything you do tend to be self-fulfilling, so it doesn't really matter what you profess or even the story you tell yourself about why you do those things. If really at the end of the day you're just motivated by gratifying your own appetites, then you're aligned with psychoria, not with whichever one you profess. So
Right.
what you profess, what you even believe your motivation might be versus what your motivation at its
And
fundamental level, that's really what matters in alignment.
yeah, and as the books go on, I think we'll see a number of examples of people who profess one thing, but it's very clear their motivations are empowering a different God than they profess to be worshiping. Uh, and and I think we see that in today's world. There are plenty of times when we can look at somebody and say they're not a good representation of that religion,
Yeah.
of my religion, whatever your religion happens to be, and that's true. They may intend to be a good representative, and they aren't, or they may have other motives, and they know that they're not. A lot of times that misalignment is unintentional, but sometimes it's very much intentional. And
Yeah.
so we try to explore those options, and there's a place for all different types of behavior.
I'm going to take us on a slight
Uh,
tangent because this is just
yeah.
a thing that I've been thinking about recently. But um,
Uh-oh.
what one one of the things that really drives a lot of people crazy about religious people, and that's other fellow people in your religion, or if you're observing people in a different religion, or like atheists often will criticize the hypocrisy of Christians or whoever,
Mm-hmm.
Jews or religious people. And fair enough. I mean, there's almost no religious person who sincerely believes their religion who isn't in some respect hypocritical, because nobody's perfect. Not a single human lives
Right.
their moral system perfectly. So everyone has some degree of hypocrisy, meaning that what you profess should be the correct behavior is your actual behavior doesn't always align with the ideal. And uh, like I saw recently, this is maybe a little bit grisly, but there's a murder trial going on in Idaho, uh, and the guy who, well, the guy that they were
The
after,
accused.
the accused, he's not accused of murder. He's accused of inciting murder because he was online with a handle that was very anti-gay and called out the for violence to be done against LGBTQ people and gays in particular.
Uh-huh.
But it so happens that in his real life, he was an out gay man uh, who was in a long-term relationship with another man. And yet online, he was calling for violence against gay people and saying that he hated gays. He had this weird double life, and people are like, I cannot reconcile the two. He never expressed any homophobic views in his real life, where he was a DJ here in Boise.
Uh-huh.
And this kind of thing happens a lot, like politicians who are calling for the end of pornography or whatever, and yet they are found out to have, lots of pornography on their computer or whatever.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, well,
They're caught soliciting a
yeah,
prostitute
that
or
whatever it
just to
is.
be cliche.
That's right. This happens pretty regularly where people, and the question is, does the fact that you don't live perfectly by your moral system make you ineligible to advocate for the moral system that you don't live perfectly by? The answer can't possibly be that's correct. If you don't live it perfectly, you can't be an advocate for
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Because then no one can advocate for any moral system, because no one lives any moral system perfectly. So we have to
Right.
make some room, some allowance for imperfect people to still be advocates for a moral system, imperfect Christians to still advocate for Christianity, or imperfect utilitarians to still advocate for utilitarianism or whatever it is. And in our world, I think we explore some of those ideas between the gods, is that there are people who say this is the right way to live, even if they don't always live by it. And that doesn't make them, I mean, you can argue whether that makes them hypocrites, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make them insincere, I guess is the point.
Right.
And some people mistake insincerity for hypocrisy. And depending on how you define your terms, those probably shouldn't be the same thing. You can be sincere and imperfect, and maybe that makes you hypocritical, but that's inevitable.
No, I think that's a valid point.
So, okay, so then getting back to the question of the gods themselves, and what they believe in, sticking with Jan van Krael, because that's where we started and we've got that partially covered. What are some additional aspects of Jan van Krael's doctrine that is fundamental? I mean, there could be a lot of things about them, but given that loving others and living your life to benefit the collective, the community, what are some other derivative principles that come out of Servarism?
Yeah, we've made it fairly political system neutral, because that's not the focus of Servarism. So the Holy Couple doesn't preach a particular type of government. However, they are very family oriented, and that service extends to the family. That Servarism teaches that as you raise your family, it is a form of service to others and to your community to raise a successful family.
In fact, it's the highest, arguably, order of service, right? Like that's, family is not just like we value family just because, and oh, by the way, it happens to be a way of being of service. The reason it's such a high priority is that it is the place, the environment in which one can express the most profound love and service anywhere. Now, it doesn't have to be the case that you only have to have a spouse or only have to have children, and that absent having those things in your life, you can't express the highest orders of love.
Well, and in fact, they explore frequently, because they have that dual, that holy couple. They explore the feminine and the masculine, and fatherhood and motherhood in particular. But it's also clear in their teachings that fatherhood does not necessarily mean biological.
Yeah.
And same thing with motherhood. That there is a beauty in nurturing and developing and teaching and growing and healing. And those are all important concepts within Servarism.
Now, this is probably an important thing to note, because it's a little bit different between each of the gods. Why do the gods care whether humans live one religion or another? And there's probably at least two answers to that. But for the Holy Couple, why do they care whether people are Servari or not?
Yeah, and we've covered this in other episodes, so I'll be pretty brief. Also, the gods themselves believe that their teachings will lead to a higher form of living, or a greater good, or that there will be ends to teaching and to helping others follow their teachings to create a society that embodies those teachings.
Well,
So, I mean, there is that
that
that in the first place.
that's only
And
true
in
of
some,
but that's only true of some of the
well,
gods. So
it's true of all of them. However,
well, take Teraithia
it doesn't look the same.
Well, take Teraithia for
as all of them.
example. Tereithia's motive in having
Yep.
people follow her doctrine is not because she's trying to do
Yeah.
the most good for the most people. She's not trying to create an ordered system because she's trying to benefit everyone else. She's trying to create an ordered system because she thinks that's what's best for her. Because her philosophy is pursue your own highest good. Try to obtain the most
Yes.
power you can. It just so happens that having a hierarchical structured system allows for her to gain the most benefit because she'll be on top of that system. So the means for her to gain the most control and influence is by having a structured system. But she
also believes that people need that structure, and without that structure, they are listless, they are ineffective.
Well,
so and maybe it's best to go into Teraithianism next and talk about each of them in particular, rather than to continue to use examples.
I agree, but what's important?
That maybe people don't understand.
What's important is that each god's motive is in line with their own value. So it isn't accurate to say all the gods want the best for humanity. That is absolutely not true. The god's highest priority is not the benefit of humanity. Each god's highest priority is whatever is in line with that god's moral system. And if their moral system is self-indulgence or self-satisfaction or whatever, if on the altruism versus egoism, if they're advocating egoism, then the god's highest motive isn't altruistic, it's egoistic.
Correct.
And so, like for Teraithia, she's egoistic, and so she's not motivated by altruistic things. So I wanted to be careful not to give the impression that all the gods are motivated by altruistic what benefits humanity. That's absolutely not true. So it's very complicated you have to be very careful to remember that the gods' motives are also in line with the philosophies that they espouse.
Agreed. Now, I do think that they believe their philosophy is superior to others, and will ultimately, as everyone follows it, will ultimately bring about a better or more ordered or more indulgent or more whatever society. But it's not through altruistic reasons why they choose to do that. I don't, for instance, when we, as we talk about Teraithia, very much more on the collectivist side and authoritarian side. But at the same time, I think that she looks at it from the standpoint of people need my order. And yes, I will be at the top of the hierarchy, but a hierarchy keeps things in check. Now, she's not saying my way will bring the greatest happiness, but she does believe that failing to follow her way will lead to chaos and ultimately to a lack of meaning, dissatisfaction, and a lack of happiness too. But that's not the main. I mean, her drive for happiness is not what motivates her. I would agree with that. It is not an altruistic motivation behind what she does, but I don't think it's genuine to say that she doesn't think that her way is better, or she just does it for purely selfish reasons. Selfish, yes, there is that aspect of it too.
Yeah. But
I think each of the gods believes in their philosophy and believes that it is superior for one reason or another. We'll get into that with each of the individual gods.
So Teraithia believes or espouses that the highest good is gaining as much, each individual gaining or rising as high in the authority hierarchy as possible. That if every individual rises to the highest level of in the hierarchy, that it will create the most benefit for every individual within the hierarchy. Even if you are a type of individual who can't rise, you're at the bottom. She believes that human nature is such that if that's the highest that you're qualified to rise, that your natural abilities and proclivities and whatever, that you will be the most, let's say, the happiest. She doesn't care about your happiness, but she
Right.
believes that you will achieve the highest happiness by fitting in the proper order. Meaning, if you rose to a level higher than your capability to sustain, you're going to be miserable because you're going to be full of anxiety and stress, worrying that you are either going to be discovered to be a fraud, you won't be able to maintain it, you'll be outcompeted by other people below you or your peers who are climbing over you. And that, so on Earth, we have, in the 70s, there was this business kind of tongue-in-cheek principle called the Peter Principle. Have you heard the Peter Principle?
Oh, I don't know that.
So there's two versions of it. One is in a corporate environment, you rise to the level of your incompetence, meaning that if you are more competent than is necessary for success at your current level, you will be promoted, and you'll keep getting promoted until you get promoted one step at least above the level of your competence. So if you were, if your competence would rise you to level 8, you will get, and you're competent at level 8, you'll get promoted at least to level 9, but then you're incompetent at level 9 and you won't get promoted anymore. So the idea is that everyone in business, at least anyone who's been in it for any length of time, is on their way to getting to a level of incompetence. And anyone who's stuck at a position of management for any length of time is an indication that they're incompetent at their job, right? So this is very negative view.
And that's not always a bad thing. I mean, as we're describing it, it sounds like you're describing a strict meritocracy. Nothing wrong with a meritocracy.
Well, it would be fine if you stopped your progression at the highest level of your competence.
Right.
The Peter Principle basically, again, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, said everyone will rise at least one level above, and so everyone's incompetent. Anyone who's been in any position of management for a while, they're stuck there because they're no longer competent to do the job where they are. What they really should is demoted down one level back to where their highest level of competence is. But Teraithia's point is being at the highest level of incompetence is misery. Her idea is you should be the highest level of competence in the hierarchy. And if everyone, as the shuffle happens and everyone sort of rises and falls as people climb. And by the way, she doesn't care how you rise through the hierarchy. Backstabbing, lying, cheating, irrelevant. She doesn't care. There's no morality for her associated with the means of rising or pushing others down.
You can do it through very legitimate legal means, or in some societies, it might be the backstabbing and the twisted means.
Now,
the point is getting to that level of authority where it matches your competence and you're able to rule or exert your authority. I think that in many ways she is advocating, if you're only good at rising to a low level, do your best at that low level,
right?
And that's your best contribution to society.
Right.
You may only be able to do this, but if you can do this well and stick with this and not try to reach beyond your station, then you'll be the best member of society you can be.
Right. And again, her motive is not the happiness of that individual, because she believes that she will always be at the top of the hierarchy. Right. And so for her, this is a way of, by following that principle, she puts everyone beneath herself. She's at the top of the hierarchy, which she believes is the highest good. So you shouldn't rise any closer to her. She shouldn't make your way up.
Go as close to her as you can.
Now, what I will say is, what she does say about things like backstabbing or lying or cheating or whatever, breaking the law, is it can be effective, but you have to be careful, because if you screw it up, if you don't do it right, um, it can end up causing you to lose authority, right? You can get arrested. You can be,
Yeah.
people won't trust you. So if you're discovered
It
being
exposes your
deceitful,
incompetence.
then it's a level of incompetence in not having done it. And
Yeah.
so her problem is not the backstabbing. Her problem is not having pulled off backstabbing effectively. And if you can't pull off backstab, sometimes altruism or acting altruistically, again, focused on the behavior, not the motive, acting in a
Yeah.
way that appears to be altruistic can be
it
the
might
best
gain you
way
power.
to gain power. Exactly.
Yes.
And so she doesn't say you should be backstabbing or you should be egotistical or egoistic versus being altruistic or whatever. Although she almost always will side on this of authoritarianism
Yeah.
is the right way, because but she recognizes even in a chaotic system, the individuals with the most capability, whether that's physical strength or intellectual prowess or whatever, will rise above the others, or they should, according to her moral system.
Yeah, and assert their dominance over others so that they can rightfully rule in that area. It doesn't mean that they're always authoritarian figures. You could do that in a representative democracy,
right?
And rise in power and find ways to elevate yourself to that level of competence.
And again, we see often on Earth, we see a lot of people living by Teraithian principles, whether they admit it or not. And most people don't like to admit that they're really Teraithian. But I think Teraithia in our world is very powerful, and we'll talk about the power of all the gods as we go, but she's very powerful because so many people follow her doctrine. Everyone is very interested in maximizing their own authority and influence in the world. It's a very powerful moral system, tempting and the rest of it. And there are people on Earth,
and there are benefits.
But across the board, we see people living by Teraithian principles on Earth.
Yeah.
And so it's a very powerful system.
So that covers Servari and Teraithianism. You want to jump into Sharinism?
Sharinism, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, Sharinism, it has a lot of similarities to both of the others that we mentioned. But on that scale, Sharinism is very much a collectivist philosophy. And what it really, I think, if you were boiling it down to its essence, it is the greatest good for the greatest number of people.
Right. So
what can we do to maximize happiness among the people?
So Sharindara is the goddess who,
yep.
and so the people who follow her are Sharinists, and her religion is typically referred to as Sharinism. And
and she takes a very utilitarian approach to all of this.
And so for her, and I'm going to use this as an example, because there are moral dilemmas that come up with utilitarianism that make people uneasy with it when you take it to its extreme. So, for example, in the trolley problem, just as one example, she would have absolutely no hesitation to say, oh, you should kill the one person to save the five. Like, there's just no question about that. You could make it more complicated by, if that one person is Albert Einstein or whoever, Louis Pasteur, who's going to end up doing more good for humanity versus five individuals who
you might be able to make a Sharinist argument.
You could make a Sharinist argument that depending on the one person is and how much good they might do for the world, that the net good to humanity is served more by killing the five people than the one. But all other things being equal, certainly kill the one instead of the five, right? Like she would have absolutely no qualms saying that.
Yeah.
And that makes for some interesting things. So, for example, when it comes to questions like slavery, she would not automatically say that slavery is evil.
Right.
You could imagine net across society that having a system where some small number of people are enslaved, but it ends up causing the most net happiness across the entire population, even considering the total amount of suffering or misery that the slaves endure, that if for society as a whole, the net on balance is more positive than negative, then slavery is justified under Sharinists. And this is one of the criticisms of utilitarianism, is that it can lead to things that people find in an absolute sense, there can be no justification for say, slavery, when under utilitarianism, they would say, no, there absolutely could be a scenario where it's justified.
Yeah, in many ways, it's almost like pure democracy or mob rule. If the bulk of the people want it a certain way, and they feel like that, having this small amount of evil in our society to do the difficult and the dirty, then it makes society. So there are societies that justify it. There are also societies that have outlawed the practice, and so it's not it. Her philosophy is rather neutral on the subject, and she wants her followers to look at the overall effect on society and what that does.
Right. So what you may be noticing across our religions, and you'll see it more as we go, is unlike religions on earth that prohibit certain behaviors with not necessarily having any explanation. Now, believers in any particular religion have tried to rationalize or justify or understand what the God's motive is for giving a commandment to, whatever, not commit adultery or not lie or whatever it is, not steal. But it can be, in our world, the gods tend to have these moral principles, and then they stick with them, and the rightness or wrongness of any motivation or behavior is a derivative, not a priori tenet of their religion. It's derived from core principles. So let's move to Weideroth next.
Sure. So
why don't you
Weideroth would be almost on the opposite side of Sharindara, in that very individualist, and his teachings are about self-discipline and building the self from within. Also, there can be altruistic sides to Weideroth and their worshippers, but ultimately it is about the individual and trying to build perfect individuals from within that individual, teaching each worshipper to follow the teachings of Weideroth in order to become enlightened or heightening the self.
So the fundamental core value of Weideroth is self-mastery, gaining complete mastery over the self. That can look a little bit different for each individual in how that manifests, right? Self-mastery of an individual who enjoys art might look different than self-mastery for someone who enjoys gardening or whatever.
Right.
Weideroth doesn't care.
And it doesn't mean everyone has to be cold and calculating either.
Right.
You can be very comfortable in your expression of emotions and very confident and mastering those emotions without, clamping down on them.
Although other people might clamp down on them.
Being in control. Right. And so it's about being in control. And if you need to clamp down on those emotions, then that's not against his teachings.
Although
whatever you need to do to stay in control of yourself, your emotions, your person.
Well, and I don't even know that it's, control, yes, but it's not about self-control so much. Maybe that's a stepping stone. It's about becoming the best version of yourself, whatever that necessarily means. And So, for example, controlling your emotions, he might say, is a fool's errand, because emotions are just signposts of condition within yourself. True self mastery is knowing yourself fully and where those emotions are stemming from, and understanding yourself, and experiencing the emotions in their appropriate and fully understood framework is more important than never getting upset or something like that.
Right.
So it's a very there are levels of understanding of what self mastery means that can look different in their manifestation as you gain higher. I think working towards something like enlightenment, although I'm very careful about that, because that enlightenment means something
There's a different term
unique
that we use
in our world, in Baon.
Yeah.
But to sort of borrow from a concept that maybe a lot of listeners would be familiar with from Earth, in sort of a Buddhist sense of enlightenment, where you achieve freedom from the illusions that often come with mortality, to understand and observe truth in its purest sense as you connect your consciousness to the universal, is sort of that highest objective. And then you have not that you've made yourself the strongest individual, but you've come to recognize that the individual doesn't exist, and that you're actually one with everything, right? So that can be a form of what Weideroth intends, but we won't get into too much more detail on this video. But the point is that developing the self maximally is Weideroth's highest purpose, and his disciples can have disagreements, and sometimes do have disagreements over what that means in practice, but that's fundamentally where Weideroth comes in. Now, that doesn't mean that he's, say, an anarchist. He recognizes that
there could be societies that are built around these concepts. Certainly is.
Well,
as we've mentioned, most of our religions are fairly politically agnostic, but at the same time, if you have a society of people that are all striving towards self-mastery, that can look like a very ordered society.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily have to.
And I think what he would say is living in a way that is in harmony with your environment, and that can include the political environment, is a part of developing yourself maximally. So,
I think that's a good point.
Okay, Viance.
You want to jump? Yeah, let's jump into Viance. So Viance is all about learning and developing the mind and growing your intellect. It is about learning about the world around you, and as you learn about the world, your mind grows and expands, and you can achieve a better society or self-improvement through learning. But learning is the key to understanding,
and not even learning
in the universe.
Learning is great, but the highest good is the pursuit of knowledge, right? And that's different than
that's very similar to learning.
Learning's a natural fit for the pursuit of knowledge. But if let's say that you achieved some level of expertise as a historian, let's say, is focused on whatever topic, topic X. You might put in order to learn something new in your field, it might take an extraordinary amount of energy to learn one new thing in your field. Whereas you could turn to a new field that you have no mastery in and learn tons of things in that new discipline, with and even potentially with much less energy. Viance would not say there's more benefit in learning lots of new things in a new discipline than there would be in spending a ton of energy to learn one new thing
to learn the next thing
to
in
learn
your
the next
area
thing.
of expertise.
That's right. Because
Yeah.
it is the pursuit of knowledge that is the highest good, not the accumulation of more knowledge that is the most good.
Agreed.
And that's a really important distinction for Vians that is easy to lose track of, because there is benefit to what type of person it makes you and what effect that has on society when pursuing truth, pursuing knowledge, pursuing whatever, the enlightenment, in the sense of discovering the truth of the universe, is the highest good. That a society made up of people who are committed to pursuing that knowledge is the type of society that she believes is the highest good. Whether that society is making lots of progress learning new things, or only has so much knowledge that they only add one new piece of knowledge per century, that's irrelevant for her. It's the dedication to the pursuit of knowledge that she puts as her highest goal.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean every scholar in the world is Viancian, of course. Just like not every scientist is any one religion in our present world. It also, the knowledge, what you do with that knowledge is rather immaterial. There's an amorality with Viancian teachings in that, it is that pursuit of knowledge, and we can look in our world, on Earth.
Yeah.
Oppenheimer. Today and see horrible things that were done in the pursuit of knowledge.
Yeah. Either terrible things done in the pursuit of knowledge, like torturing people to discover how their bodies work. Vivisection. She would have no problem with vivisection as long as it was being done for to understand the body's functions better or whatever.
Yeah.
So in some sense, she can be a little bit immoral. On the authority spectrum, Viance doesn't care. She does not have any opinion of whether individual authority versus collective authority, which one is better. She would certainly advocate studying all aspects of across the authority paradigm or spectrum and understanding them. But in terms of advocating one over the other, she has no preference one way or another. She's
no, as long as the individual has the freedom to pursue knowledge as they see fit. And not even individual, as long as that ability is not hampered.
Right. And even
she doesn't care what authority looks like.
Even on the altruism versus egoism, she also doesn't care. So Viance in some ways is our true neutral deity. Like on the two axes, she doesn't care either way. Let's jump to Yeren.
Yeah, Yeren, the redheaded stepchild. We don't get to explore Yeren much in book one. And that's a shame. In many ways, Yeren is all about the creative side of humanity. And that journey to create, to be creative, to embrace that nature in humanity is our highest goal. Just like the accumulation of knowledge is to Viance, the ability to create, and that doesn't necessarily have to be art. It could be a farmer creating crops, growing and nurturing. It could be somebody who is creatively looking at any aspect of society and trying to embrace that creative side.
Right. Creating a new legal system or an economic system is also a creative act. It doesn't have to be fine arts. Although most Yerenites tend to be drawn to the fine arts, music and painting and sculpting, etc. Because it is in the expression of the creative act. It is in the pursuit of or the living out the creative act that we discover or express the greatest beauty within ourselves. And beauty is subjective, and Yeren doesn't provide a standard of beauty, but he believes that in pursuing creativity, beauty will be maximized, and part of that beauty is the transformation of the individual as they become more skilled and versed in the in creating in create skilled at creating. Creating is
Right.
its own benefit and form of beauty. In fact, it's the highest form of beauty, and it's the highest expression of the good of the human soul, is what I think how Yeren would say it. And so Yeren doesn't have an organized priesthood. He doesn't even have a holy symbol. He's the only of the gods that doesn't have a holy symbol. He leaves it up to the individuals.
They also don't have a form necessarily. They appear as the as the viewer would most picture a picture of beauty. And so Yeren in many ways is sort of difficult to depict by mortals, and that's why you'll notice on the covers we put the symbols of the gods, but Yeren doesn't really embrace one symbol. Yeren believes that all symbols can show Yeren, as long as the worshiper is creating that symbol as an expression of beauty and creation.
Yeah, and so sorry, I'm just 1 second.
Oh, we'll work at your speed. That's good.
Okay, so that's Yeren. How about we've touched briefly on Psychoria, but just really quickly about Psychoria.
Yeah. Psychoria is self-indulgence. It's hedonism, and that's not always a bad thing, but it certainly can be, and usually the way we use the term today tends to be bad.
Well,
she is
and I really would say it's, although a lot of her practitioners maybe believe that self-indulgence is her philosophy. I don't think that's quite right. Hedonism, and most people have a rather shallow understanding of hedonism. So
yes.
Psychoria's teaching about hedonism is much, as a moral system, is much more profound than I think the casual use of hedonism as a synonym for selfishness or self-indulgence, right? Hedonism, what she would say is the appetites of the human soul, the human body, whatever that is, your appetites, whether they be physical or spiritual, are the pathway or the guideposts along the pathway to the deepest expression of the beauty within you. So like Yeren says, hey, the creative process is the highest expression of the beauty within the human soul, or the highest expression of the essence of humanity. Psychoria says, no, it's not creativity. It's listening, paying attention to what your body or your mind, your soul is telling you that it wants, and then satisfying those, finding the ways to satisfy those needs, those desires, is the path to the deepest good. And so like just abuse of alcohol or abuse of drugs, over consumption, even if it's in a sort of a gluttony of pleasure, is not what she advocates for. Now, she also doesn't say don't do that. She
right.
accommodates it, and people are very susceptible to addiction and those kind of things. But she doesn't say, for example, going on a drug crazed bender is the highest good. What she would say is the appetites that you have, or the pleasure that's derived from food or sex or reading poetry or whatever, the satisfaction of those desires is where you will find who you truly are. Those are the signposts to true self-discovery and self-expression. And she just says, focus on those things, And so egoism is the highest good. It's the pathway. Now, doing those with other people, maybe she says
Yeah.
doing drugs or drinking alcohol or having dinners with other people is an even higher path, and inviting people into a shared drug experience, right? Like doing LSD together, may be a better way. And so she's
Not
not.
that we're espousing drug use.
No, but she
Yes.
certainly does, not drugs themselves, but every form of
Yes.
of the gratification of appetites is the highest good.
Agreed. But she also recognizes that overindulgence can have ramifications that can ultimately lower
Right, your ability to enjoy.
your ability to, yeah. And so if you overdose on drugs and your life is able to be saved, but the quality of life has gone down, well, then that was a misuse of
Right.
trying to satisfy your needs.
Yeah, yeah.
So self-indulgence, self-gratification are parts of it. But ultimately, that hedonist approach is really where she's at.
Yeah. And then
from a technical side of things, we often use hedonism as just pure self-indulgence to whatever ends. And hers is a little more nuanced than that, but it includes that too.
It does. And a lot of her followers
yeah.
end up there.
Yeah, exactly.
By default.
Let's jump into Akrahar.
Yeah. So Akrahar's interesting. The easy shorthand for him is that he's an anarchist, but it's a little more nuanced.
It's not entirely true either.
It's not entirely true, and it's certainly more nuanced than that. So Akrahar teaches, he holds as the highest good, that everyone should hold themselves as the highest authority. He only cares about the authority axis. He doesn't care about the altruism versus egoism axis at all.
Right.
He only cares about the other one. And he's all the way pegged to the individual side. He says you should not have any authority higher than yourself. Whatever you want to do should be the highest good. So whether that's, not recognizing any political or governmental authority, not recognizing the church. He even says you shouldn't worship the gods, including me. Do not worship me. I am not, your deity. Like, I'm teaching you a principle by which, if lived, you will free yourself.
Pardon the technical difficulties there. We had a problem with the microphone, but we're back. Let's jump right into Akrahar. Akrahar is the final of our gods. And I think the easiest way to sum up Akrahar is he is all about personal freedom and often is depicted as an anarchist, that he believes there is no greater authority than the self. Todd, why don't you dive into that a little bit and talk about some of the specifics and some examples?
Yeah, so Akrahar on the altruism egoism vertical axis doesn't care. He
not allowed.
The only thing he cares about is the authority axis, and he pegs all the way to the individual authority side of things. And Akrahar is fine if an individual wants to voluntarily enter into sort of a social arrangement, a social contract, where you may voluntarily give up some of your authority for the benefits that you would get in exchange by participating in a free association type of situation. But Akrahar would say never subordinate your own individual autonomy at the end of the day or ultimately to anyone else. And so it doesn't matter whether we're talking about political authority, religious authority, moral authority. And Akrahar even says, "Don't worship me." And
or religious authority.
Right. Ironically, some of the people who profess to worship Akrahar miss the point by worshiping him at all. And I suppose he would say, sure, in some abstract sense, if you voluntarily decide that there's something that you gain or that you desire out of worshiping him, fine, so be it. That's the exercise of your autonomy. He would probably scoff at that as a ludicrous exercise of your personal authority. But if at the end of the day it truly is coming from your own desire and your own sense of what you gain, then fine, so be it. But he has no desire for people to worship him. Although ironically, like on earth, so many people, whether they recognize it or not, hold themselves as their own highest authority, that that becomes one of the most prevalent philosophies in our world. Is and you know, we can see some of the criticisms that might be placed at the feet of those who hold themselves as their own highest authority. It isn't good for society necessarily. And Akrahar would say, who cares if it's good or not for society? I don't care about society. I care about everyone.
Is it good for you and for
is it good for you? That's right.
Yeah,
the individual.
That's really what it boils down to. That's part of why he does not endorse any organized religion. He does not have an organized church. He doesn't have nations that are following him. In general, it's all about the individual. And while there are some communities that have gathered together some like-minded individuals to form those communities, they do so via free association and can come and go. They don't recognize any central authority, which doesn't work on the large scale. But he realizes that people are still social creatures, and living a life of a hermit might work for a very few, but we're still social animals, and to be able to achieve what we desire out of life often has social interaction with others, and he encourages them to get together on those smaller scales of like-minded individuals to form tight-knit communities, or loose communities, whatever works.
Yeah, and just like Akrahar would say, don't submit yourself to anyone else's authority, he also teaches you shouldn't seek to subvert anyone else's individual authority. So he wouldn't say you can do whatever you want, including subjugating other people under your authority. So he's very opposed to Teraithia in the sense that she says gain as much authority over other people as you can and stack everyone up in a hierarchy. He would demolish any hierarchy, and anyone who seeks to impose hierarchy, he would say that is an unhealthy or an unwise use of autonomy that should be quashed by everyone else. Like, don't allow, no one should seek to establish themselves as a higher authority over anyone else. Again, the free association, fine, but otherwise.
And I think most other religions would not see Akrahar as a threat per se, as in they're going to cause a revolution and overthrow a system. They see Akraharianism more as a cancer or a sickness that can erode a society's organization and structure, rather than something that will overthrow it.
Yeah, so the constitutional peasant in Monty Python's The Holy Grail would be a great example of some, an anarcho-syndicalist commune is a perfect example of an Akraharian society. Those probably can't exist at large scale, though. Organization just doesn't work to not have hierarchies.
Yeah. So we don't, in the first book, we don't show a lot of examples of outright Akraharianism, but we do show individuals who are unhappy with the gods, unhappy with religion, maybe are anti-religious, and feel like they should be left alone and left to their own devices. That is an Akraharian philosophy.
Right.
And so inadvertently, those individuals would be following an Akraharian teaching and be more aligned with Akrahar, even if it's not intentional. That's a good example of unintentional worship.
And Akrahar, that's probably the most in line with Akrahar's teaching is, yes, you should disdain or disregard all of the gods. In so doing, you're actually worshiping him, as you said, and he gains power from that. So he maintains his standing among the gods through the fact that a lot of people dislike all of the gods, or any authority. So well, that gets us to the end of all of our gods. If you believe that any of our representations are inaccurate or missing things, or if you believe that those representations of the major philosophies by which people live their lives, even on Earth, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you think that you fall into one of those categories, put that in there too. We've had a lot of fun comments from readers in that line. And in most cases, none of us fall wholly into one category, but maybe 20% in one and 30% in another and 45 in a third, and just a tiny bit of a couple of others. So, we'd love to hear from you.
All right. Until next time, enjoy the journey.
Take care.